Fasten your seatbelts for the realest Eagles and Sixers YouTuber! One who plays no clickbait and gets to the point! The myth, the legend, Nicky Steves! Come to my channel, you know the deal. Yo, boy, always keeps things real. I'm simply statue think and slate, dropping unrealistic magic. 2K takes for the clip. Even though cats like that get views closer to the milli, never hear me preach, flip on to Philly. Avoid you watching the Eagles all the way through the early 22. Authentic talk, forget what others do. Come to my channel, you know the deal. Yo, boy, always keeps things real. The 24/7, 365 way. Sports content for the reals that feel the day. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this special live stream here on Wednesday evening, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're here to talk about the bombshell news that was dropped by ESPN earlier per Tim McManus. You guys that in Philly sports media know who Tim McManus is. He was part of dropped the report that there may be a beef between Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts. Now, we don't know for sure all the details about it, but this was a long article, and it's talked about a lot of stuff in there. And I came across it earlier today. Now, I was sitting there on YouTube. It was around like 11-ish or so. I had done my morning workout. I was looking at the stock market, mind my own bee, and then all of a sudden, I saw the news drop, and it's like, oh, snap, wait a minute. It's like it came from Tone to Shields. I was on looking at his channel at Chalk It Up Sports, and we got Blaze Radio in the chat, my compadre from the Pick and Roll podcast, who's fresh off that podcast, which ended a little under an hour ago. I checked it out, and Chalk It Up, Tone to Shields was talking about how this whole thing, he was going through the article itself from ESPN about some of the different possibilities, and that got me thinking about it. Now, here I am going to talk about it. Now, the article initially came from ESPN per Tim McManus. Like I said, I'm going to pull up on a separate tab. Maybe I'm going to go through parts of the article, but when I read it, there's a link to the article. The main things I took away from this were there was some discussion that Brian Johnson may have been the middleman between this Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts beef. That he was the offensive coordinator for us last year. And it's believed, now Brian Johnson was the one in charge of the play calling duties, and he was the offensive coordinator. But there has been some talk too as well that Sirianni was really calling the plays, which is hinted at in the article. I remember on Chalk It Up Sports earlier, Tone DeShields himself pointed to a specific example in the Washington game where it was a third down, it was a third and long, or where Johnson, the offensive coordinator, wanted to call a pass, but then Sirianni changed it to a run and it didn't work out. And even then, I looked into it a little bit more. There was discussion on WIP 94, the Philly-based radio station, right before the wild card game against the Bucs. And Sirianni was asked about his communication with Brian Johnson. And he just gave the generic answer of, well, it's their job to do it, and it's my job to help go along with whatever they want to do. But he didn't really give much of an answer to it. It was just a bunch of jibber-jabber in response. This was like a few days right before the wild card game against the Bucs. But the point being is WIP 94 and some other people in Philly media were talking about at the time, they thought there might have been a rift between Johnson and Sirianni. And, he got both guys got a lot of the blame for it. Brian Johnson particularly got a lot of blame for it from Eagles fans. Even some Eagles fans I know were calling for Brian Johnson's head throughout the season with his awful play calling. And he was being criticized for having play calling schemes that were like Madden or generic. And the Eagles throughout the season on offense, you saw a lot of slant routes right there. And just a lot of play calls that really didn't work out well. Like, the Eagles got away from the run game late in the season, and it's been reported in that article that Hurts wasn't on the same page with Sirianni's X's and O's. And back to Brian Johnson's role in this, he had a connection with Hurts. Brian Johnson, when he was a quarterback in high school, Hurts' dad was one of the coaches, and there was a connection there. And that was part of the reason when Shane Steichen, our former offensive coordinator during that Super Bowl run, who was in charge of play calling duties, went to take the offer as the Colts head coach, he got from Brian Johnson going from QB coach working with Hurts directly, getting promoted to offensive coordinator. And you saw that didn't work out. He got fired at the end of the season, and now you got Kellen Moore in charge. But they're thinking that there might have been some conflict there, that some people think that Sirianni may have been calling the plays all along. But it was publicly in denial about it. And that's true. Maybe it is true, possibly, that Sirianni was calling the plays, because some of the schemes they set up, you just really wondered, what the hell's going on here? Now, we don't know for sure if it was Sirianni, but it is possible, because we know about the time he changed the call with that Washington game on that 3rd and long, and it didn't work out. Now, is it possible that Sirianni was sometimes trying to override the offensive coordinator? It is possible. Now, we don't know that for sure, but this could be possible. Good evening, Bear. Dan, so that is possible too. Because we know that, we do know with Nick Sirianni and play calling for a fact. His first season, he was doing play calling early along. Then he gave up play calling duties around the midway point, turns over to Shane Steichen. And the Eagles' offense instantly improved the second half of that season. They made a push to get a 9-win season out of it. And they had a wild card game against the Bucs, 2-7. And then the following year, we saw when we brought in some weapons with Shane Steichen in charge of play calling, we were just a few points away from a Super Bowl win. And we clearly saw Shane Steichen's impact on that offense. But then when he went and accepted the offer with the Colts, especially looking back on now, that his first year he took a Colts team we thought at best maybe 5-6 wins and turned into a 9-win team. Granted, they missed the playoffs, but still, for a first year, taking a team with little expectations to a winning record, you can see the Shane Steichen effect. And you look at what the Eagles did last year without him. Now, we do wonder, was it Brian Johnson? Was it Sirianni? Was there possibly something between Hurts and Sirianni where they're not on the same page? I think personally, yes. I don't think they're necessarily on the same page. Now, we don't know if it's necessarily a beef or if this is blown out of proportion just for something McManus to talk about. Because, again, I think about the article, the main points that were brought up. That Brian Johnson, who was familiar with Hurts, did not click as well. With a history with Hurts' family going back to his days as a quarterback in high school, referring to Brian Johnson, the former offensive coordinator. So I get they wanted to go with the familiarity. Now, it is possible that the main beef also could have been between Johnson and Sirianni, because the article indicates that Brian Johnson was not as familiar with Sirianni. So there may have been some communication woes between them, which also could have played a role in some communication woes between Hurts and Sirianni last year. So it is possible that there's a correlation there between the offensive coordinator, the head coach not being on the same page, and the quarterback not being on the same page. And there were times right there that even throughout the season, like we know about the Christmas Day game, after we narrowly won that game on Christmas Day against the Giants to 11 wins, it Hurts, was doing most of the talking. He said, yeah, we got 11 wins. I'm not happy, unquote. That was Devontae Smith told the reporters, and then he also, quote, it needs to be better for what I want to do, what everyone else here wants to do, what we want to do. We're nowhere near that, so no, I'm not happy. Meaning that the offense wasn't going to the players' liking. Now, we don't know who for sure was responsible for this for sure. I think personally it's a little bit of both the head coach and the offensive coordinator, personally. Because I think that they're part of the reason why it worked out better. It worked out better under Steichen because Steichen had some familiarity with Sirianni. I don't think Sirianni did his best part to connect with Brian Johnson, too. Another thing is with this article, this long article on ESPN, which I'll share it with you guys in the chat. So if you guys want to get a clue as to what I'm talking about, there you go. It's right here in the chat. There you guys can follow along if you want to. So I'm just skimming through it on a separate tab, going through some of the same stuff. And then there's and one of the sources in this article at the beginning, so we're about a couple paragraphs in, it's a source that says, quote, what was taught was not necessarily what was relayed in the moment. A team source said, but that team source is not named. Then, quote, he wanted to add to it, like, it's not quite enough. Let me add to this. And then the source goes on, quote, Jalen doesn't give Nick enough credit. And then, quote, a lot of what we do well does stem from Nick, unquote. Now, with the source itself, it's hard to say because we don't know who this anonymous source is. Now, we believe it has ties to the Eagles organization, obviously, since they're getting inside information. But here's the thing. We don't know what that source's mentality is in that organization. Does that source have some bias in favor of the coaches? Is that source mutual? Is that source, having a beef with Hurts? Well, not necessarily a beef, but the point is we don't know where the source really stands. So we don't know if it's a credible source or not, especially since it's an unnamed one. If you don't have a name, you don't really know if that's a valid or not. So that's the thing with this article right here, that all this talk about saying that Hurts wasn't on the page with Sirianni. Okay. It seems like there were times, and it seems like it's possible. I think it's at least true to some degree based off the way we played last year. I don't know to what extent, but I do believe there has to be some truth to this, that these two guys were not on the same page. You got little G Griffin. I'm a big fan of the Eagles 2024. Better Eagles wins 14-3. I'm going to be a uncle, and it's a girl. First off, I'll start with the congratulations on being an upcoming uncle and best of luck. And as far as the Eagles go, I think as the season goes along, to tie into what we're talking about here, how well they play or whether they struggle or not throughout the season will tell us whether or not there's some legitimacy to this story of Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts not being on the same page. That will really be the deciding factor that we'll see as time goes along to how valid this article is. As of today, it's just an article that got people talking in the Philly sports world, myself included. And we've noticed that, especially now last season itself, from what we know, the play calling did not work out. It was not there, and that led to a lot of close games in the early stretch. Like, we remember the games against Washington, we won those games, but they were struggles, defensive struggles in both wins. So even though we won, it's like we kind of barely won. And another thing that stands out, not to discredit the win the first time, but remember, one of the big factors was Ron Rivera not going for it off the game-tying touchdown, not the game-tying touchdown, but the touchdown put them down by 1. They went for the extra point in the tie instead of going for the 2 in the win. If they would have went for the 2, well, who knows what would have happened? Maybe they would have been converted and we would have lost that game too. Who knows? But that's one of those things that maybe looking back on, we kind of got lucky in that regard that we didn't lose that game. And we saw the Patriots game at time. Near the end, we played a little sloppy and we barely held on. Remember the Cowboys win? We nearly blew that game. We had that fumble. We were trying to run out the clock that fortunately our guys recovered. Because if we didn't recover that, that would have been horrific. Because that could have led to the Cowboys scoring the game-winning touchdown. Because remember, we punted the ball. Cowboys had a chance. Remember, they got with close, but they couldn't get the ball across the end zone to close the game. And remember, if we would have, that fumble would have led to us. The point being is, though, we were winning ugly in some of these wins. Like, we barely won some of those games, too. So you could see there were some problems in the play calling and decision-making. It was mainly the talent on the team, because we do have a ton of talent that was helping us win those games. And then finally, as the season went along, just the talent couldn't keep up forever. Once that 49ers game happened and we got ass blasted by the Niners, we played like a fucking Division I high school team, and that like a Division II team, actually. And And once that happened, you saw that was like the beginning and the end for us, because once that happened, I think the team's confidence was shot. And from there, everything just, everything was just a downhill, was just slowly falling down a cliff from there. Or was the equivalent to setting off a volcano. And that can be attributed to poor coaching right there. And we as fans, remember, we blamed both the offense and defensive coordinators, especially toward the end. Because remember, toward the end of it, now this is kind of off subject with the offense, but we moved Sean Desai and put Matt Patricia in charge. And just, when we're in playoff mode, which was not a good idea. Not to mention, Matt Patricia, remember, we saw in Super Bowl 52, he was not that good a defensive coordinator. Not to take away from our win or anything, but the point being is we were screwed up on both sides of the ball. So now this could not, now I do think, now this is just, it was a contribution to the whole coaching staff last year just not being on the same page, and that ruins our potential. Now, with the Sirianni Hurts thing, to me, we'll have to see what happens going forward. We will have to see what going forward. Now, if Jalen Hurts doesn't get any preseason playing time, then maybe I can't contribute that to anything, because we know teams don't really play their guys in preseason anymore. Now, if we see early in the season a potential argument between Hurts and Sirianni on the sideline, that could be a sign right there. Oh, something's not up right here. So that's something that now, as a fan, I'm going to be looking forward to. I'm going to be looking out to see what's the communication like between them on the sideline? Are cameras going to catch anything? Because then that could be a determining factor of whether or not there's a beef or not. Now, I know for sure is when we were like around June-ish, there had been a few press conferences. And during these press conferences, they asked Jalen Hurts a question about the situation. I'm scrolling through the article to try to find it. What was it? It was something about, along the lines, they asked Hurts something about the whole thing with Sirianni. And he said that, and Hurts said something along the lines of, oh, that's a good question. I'll have to think about an answer to it. Something along those lines, which means there was a question they asked specifically that Hurts about Sirianni that he didn't answer, which indicates, okay, maybe there is something going on behind the scenes that they don't want to talk about publicly. Now, we don't know if it's necessarily a full-blown beef like it's talked about in the article. But this is something that we will have to wait and see over time how this plays out, because the main things I'm looking at right here is, number one, now this creates a whole bunch of questions of who was really in charge of play calling last year. Was it Brian Johnson or was it Nick Sirianni? I think this year, with Kellen Moore there, we will see whether that's the case or not. And then at the rate, that'll determine, like, we'll see how do we do this year with Kellen Moore there. If we're running similar schemes under Kellen Moore, then that's a sign that Sirianni's doing the play calling. But if we see things occur to more to a Kellen Moore style, that's a sign that it's the offensive coordinator is calling the play. Now, whether or not Kellen Moore does right with his team and whether or not his style suits well, that's a whole nother subject in itself for another stream or another video. Because here, this is just focusing on Hurts and Sirianni. So for starters, it's a lot of mystery because, number one, we do know that Nick Sirianni sometimes likes to control things, but we don't know to what extent. We don't know how much of an impact he had in the offensive play calling itself. I'm sure he had some degree of influence for sure, but I'm sure Brian Johnson played a role. So I'm going to have to look at both Sirianni and Brian Johnson on that one. So that could have been one problem right there. I do think there was at least some disagreements about their X's and O's, so I do think there were times they weren't on the same page. And you just got the vibe from by the end of the season that the whole offense wasn't on the same page with the coaching staff. So this may have just been the coaching staff as a whole. Jalen Hurts, since he's the quarterback, people are going to look at him the most. And because Sirianni is the head coach, they're the main guys in this whole cluster from last year that are still here. I think it's also possible that ESPN, Tim McManus, and them are focusing on those two guys because the quarterbacks and the coaches are, you will, fair or not, get the main talk. So I feel like that's a part of it too. They're going to look at those guys. But I do think there is at least some degree of conflict that occurred last year. Will it get worked out? Hopefully it will. If there was, I hope it wasn't as serious as this article is trying to make it out to be. But hey, time will ultimately tell on that one. Let's just hope that whatever issues they have, they work out, they get on the same page. Hopefully everything all works out. Now, considering Brian Johnson had a connection with Hurts, and Sirianni was obviously having some input in the offense and would, at least from time to time, change the play calls. We do know that. I do think there is at least some degree of truth to this article. Some degree. But hopefully it'll get fixed up because the last thing we need is the quarterback and the head coach not on the same page. Because that's the type of drama that stops teams from being able to live up to its full potential. If we're really looking to get back to the Super Bowl again, we can't be having the coach and the quarterback on the outs. I mean, I'm seriously hoping from the fan point, this article is just being blown out of proportion. Everything works out right. Now, from my perspective, again, from the outside looking in, I think, look, let the offensive coordinator do the play calling. That's worked out before. As long as you make sure you got the right offensive coordinator in there. Hopefully Kellen Moore is that. But then again, he's been in two other places and he's been on the outs before. So time will tell on that one right there. Because the more I think about it, I'm not saying I doubt this team, but I'm saying if anything does stand in the way for the Eagles, it's not going to be talent. It's going to be the coaching. But whatever this little thing is between Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts, I'm hoping it all works out. I am. I'm hoping it all works out. I'm hoping that this isn't a conflict and a problem that continues with them throughout the season. But we still got the Eagles preseason opener against the Ravens 2 days from now on Friday. We'll have to see what happens there. And let's wait for now for preseason. Hey, it's about getting the team on the same page, getting the guys ready, determine who's going to make the roster, filling out the competitions. Which we'll talk about that more at another time. But hopefully this whole thing blows over between Hurts and Sirianni. If it doesn't, now I do have to put that out there too. If this doesn't blow over and it becomes a problem throughout the season, considering Hurts is in the second year of his contract and the Eagles still all money, they're obviously would out Sirianni and bring in a new head coach. Because in those type of situations, teams in all sports lean toward the player over the coach, or in baseball, the manager most of the time. Especially when it's a star player they're putting a bunch of money behind. So whatever it is, they got to work out this play calling thing. Eagles need to figure out who's going to be in charge of play calling and let that person take charge. And if that's Kellen Moore, make sure that Kellen Moore is on the same page with Jalen Hurts. So that way they can do things effectively. Let's let whatever conflict there is boil over. If it's part because Sirianni's X's and O's aren't on the same page, okay, let the offensive coordinators and the quarterback coaches worry about that. Let's tweak up the X's and O's because remember, it wasn't just Hurts too. We're getting indications that guys like Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown weren't happy either. So I think if anything, I'm hoping it's the coaching staff fixing it up because I think that's the main problem. So I do think there's some degree of truth to it. But ultimately, I feel like they're focusing on Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni specifically because it's the quarterback and the head coach. And those are the two sides that people in sports media love to talk about the most. But yeah, hopefully the Eagles fix up everything and create an offensive scheme that works with the players because that's the main thing they really got to do for this season right here. So I'll leave it at that right there. There's really not much else to say except, yeah, I mean, except to just say thanks to everyone that tunes in. I hope you had a good time. I hope you're enjoying your Wednesday night. Probably getting ready for your work on Thursday, which I'm going to do. I'll be back at work tomorrow. And yeah, and also for all the wrestling fans in here, if you follow the Hardcore Sports Network, there will be an AEW stream coming up closer to the hour at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you want to catch that right there. And for all the wrestling fans right there, you can catch your AEW live stream starting 7:50 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The AEW Dynamite watch along with Earl Cole. So if you're a wrestling fan, tune into that. And if you guys want to catch the replay of what I had to say on this one, you can do so. It'll be available on my channel and the Hardcore Sports Network. But here's the link to my channel for you guys to check out my channel. Sub me up if you haven't done so already. And also as well, this will be on Spotify, likely be by the end of the week. If you follow me on Twitter, I will post the link to it. I will tweet the link out to it when it's ready on Spotify. While we're at it, matter of fact, I'll share my Twitter profile for you guys. So if you're not following me there, you can hit me up on Twitter and see what I got to tweet. But in the meantime, I'm out for today talking about the Eagles for now. We'll talk more about the Eagles after the preseason game against the Ravens. What I saw from it that was good, what I think needs to be worked on, what I thought of the individual performances. And I'll definitely have more Eagles to talk about as we get closer to the season and then during the regular season itself. There's a link to my Twitter. You can hit me up on Twitter. Follow me. In the meantime, I will be dropping some YouTube shorts. If I see something like a quick little thing that's Eagles or Eagles related, or even something that's Sixers related, because I do basketball content as well, or something big in the sports world, I might do a YouTube short about that. So you can check out my channel for that as well. And yeah, thanks to everyone that tunes in. I hope you enjoy the rest of your night. Nikki Stees signing off, and I'll catch you next time.